back to Animation Dissection, the Animation Dissection podcast. So I am Nixie, of course, here with Zorak.
Howdy.
And today we are going to be talking about the Triplets of Belleville. But before that, let's go through the usual slough of animation news. So I think I'll go first for this one. We got, let's see, Charlie Kaufman, the guy that directed Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and I think he also did Being John Malkovich. He has a stop motion animated film that was kickstarted online, and it was called Anomalisa or Anomalisa. I don't know how to pronounce it. And it was produced by Starburns Industries. If you ever watched Adult Swim, you've probably seen something of theirs. It's the guys behind Rick and Morty, and as well as something before that called Frankenhole, which was also a stop motion film. And it is currently seeking distribution by circulating it in the festival circuit. And it's another one of those ones where they're saying, hey, it's a animation for adults, but it's not being done in the we're really edgy kind of way,
Interesting.
So we'll see how that goes. It's another one of those things where we're starting to see kickstarted films and things like that entering into the actual world now, as opposed to just being, failed projects or something that's going to be delivered on soon. So we'll see how that works out.
Okay. I have a bit of sad news, unfortunately. This is particularly going to be sad for you, Nixie, because it's something you're a big fan of. I'm sad to say that the creator of Marmaduke, Brad Anderson, passed away at the tender age of 91. And I know you are a huge fan of Marmaduke. It's an often large point of comparison, not used there for sarcasm given the size of the dog, but
he just had so much love to give.
I know that dog was big.
He brought so much light into the world. Anyway, so let's see. Richard Williams, pretty much considered like one of the master animators out there, pretty much wrote the book on the techniques of it, has produced a new film by himself called Prologue. He just kind of released a bit of a trailer of him talking about it. Hopefully it'll actually be finished this time. And it's pretty much going to be really insanely detailed. It's about like Spartan warriors facing off, and the entire thing, it's like that Aha music video in style, but like not rotoscoped.
That's the rotoscoping's half the fun.
Yeah, no, but that's it's insane. Like it looks like charcoal figure drawings, or at least graphite figure drawings with like shading and everything.
Interesting.
It's kind of insane.
Check that out. Assuming it happens.
Yep.
A random thing that's not really news, but I'm going to mention it anyways. There's a interesting tweet that's been floating around. I think folks might want to take a look at it because it's kind of an interesting point of comparison given some of the stuff we talk about. There was a tweet out of some Japanese Twitter accounts and some discussion on their side about trying to understand English body language, or rather the body language that's kind of demonstrated in cartoons. It's kind of an interesting point of comparison because there's often a bit of a disconnect from our side as well, trying to understand Japanese conventions and body language as well, and some of the visual language that's used,
and just various gestures in everyday life.
Gestures.
Yeah,
and some of the emotional, or the context is, it's not there. They don't have the frame of references, and it's worth taking a look at. We'll have the tweet in the show notes. Just take a look at it. It's kind of interesting. The emotions, by the way, that they didn't understand and that they were asking Japanese for an explanation of were finger quotes for sarcasm in particular. Both tapping on shoulders as well as far as I can tell, the licked finger touch person sizzle.
It was just the licking touch person touching shoulder sizzle. That's all it was. Is because he doesn't understand why.
I saw some people there trying to understand.
It wasn't why you would lick your tongue first and then touch someone's shoulder.
Right. There's the point at eyes and point at you while
like, hey, I'm watching you. Better not fucking do that shit.
Yeah, and then there's the fingers behind the back lie, things.
Yeah, the crossed, promising something with your fingers crossed. Yep. So some of those are cultural. Some of those are also like Japan's form of quotation brackets, they don't look like, dash marks like ours, and so doing the visual thing of taking the bunny ears and winking them doesn't really indicate to them like, oh, that's what a quotation mark is.
But they learn
Like,
English. They know our English.
well,
They
yeah,
know
but
some
they
English.
wouldn't it wouldn't be the first thing to come to mind if someone does bunny ears with like the
Sure.
yeah, like
I mean, that's fair.
that's not the first thing that would come to mind. So
Sure.
some of these, it's like it's kind
It's
of like,
understandable, but it's still an interesting thing.
oh yeah, I mean it's kind of like how if we said screwball and they just directly translated the word screw and ball, it doesn't make any sense to them.
No, it makes. I
It's
mean, the entire reason why screwball makes sense over here is just that those are a weird. They understand baseball, Sneaksy. They
no, but I
understand
understand
baseball as
is
much
that
as
like
we
they'd
do.
understand if it's again it's one of those things where if you're directly translating an idiom or a weird expression,
Sure.
and it happens in all sorts of languages, like that's the hard part. So when we do like visual puns like that, it doesn't make any goddamn sense to us. And it's the same time whenever they do really weird puns, it's like that doesn't make any sense to us because we
Well, a lot of
translate
their
those
puns
words
are
differently.
the. Plus, there's a bit of a cultural difference. Like a lot of their puns are language puns rather than visual puns typically, or the visual pun tends into ultimately being a language pun. They really like their linguistic double entendres. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah,
or or,
they
or homonyms particularly.
yep, pretty
So
much.
that's a big part of their culture. Whereas we don't have a lot of that sort of stuff. You know, we tend to treat homonyms more as a thing of annoyance in a lot of cases. Like the fact that we
Or
use
just
similar
something you'd
words.
see in Family Circus or or Marmaduke. So let's see. I don't know if you remember, but we talked about this quite a while ago. Super Turbo Atomic Ninja Rabbit.
Right.
It was this thing that a lot, was initially positioned as if it was a long lost cartoon, and many people, including myself, thought, nah, it's well done, very well crafted, but only as a stylistic homage. It has turned out to be that. It was created by a English animation collective called The Line, and it's getting a kind of a VR demo as something. You
A
can
VR
also
demo.
like they're making some another group made a kind of a what is it like an Oculus type of environmental like experience around it. So this was like a promotional video for that as well.
That sounds dumb. Like I thought the thing, like
Yeah,
the original trailer was dumb. Like I'm not like I am admittedly a VR skeptic in the sense that I haven't actually used it, so and that's kind of how these things work. But
yeah.
I can understand and comprehend like, oh, that's probably cool in VR. That doesn't sound that cool in VR. That particular example. That sounds kind of like, oh, I'll get to see concept art in VR. Like,
I don't again I don't know what the VR experience is like, but apparently it's this thing that they were just producing in conjunction with each other. So, but
all
either
right,
way, the trailer they originally made itself is really cool, and you can actually purchase a they made a book of the original concept art and the groundwork for that production.
interesting.
So, and a lot of that was, and I thought it was very well done. So I think it was something kind of cool out there, and so the guys behind it, the line are pretty good. So I'm pretty impressed by their work at least.
Right.
So so the last thing I got is kind of something special, I guess. So
Not.
Nickelodeon decided to launch kind of like I guess I would call this a very public trial balloon, although I don't know how public they were hoping for it to be. But it's the idea of combining 90s kid nostalgia and the Avengers' success by making a movie where all your favorite Nicktoons characters from the past come together and do a thing, I guess.
Yeah, you got your Dougs. You have your angry Beavers, your Rugrats, and now they're in one film and they're gonna do something.
Yeah, most people I saw just saw it as what it was, as a desperation
Yeah.
on Nickelodeon's part. They really have not had a good new hit in a long time.
And then Nickelodeon's just like raking it in and on the side and going like, "Oh, you guys having trouble over there? Uh, oh, that must suck." As they're just pouring money down their like throats, choking on it.
You mean Cartoon Network,
What did I say?
Nickelodeon?
Well, yes, Cartoon Network is doing that while mocking Nickelodeon.
Okay, yes.
Yes.
Boy, are they ever.
Yeah, because in fact, keeps persistently making new series that are doing exceedingly well. And then also just picking up series that, Nickelodeon has or Cartoon Network has a history now very well established of picking up stuff that other networks abandoned and then making it very profitable.
Hmm.
So,
Definitely. I mean, and again, like Nickelodeon has also, it pretty much shoved Korra to online only. It's currently putting Harvey Beaks on hiatus without telling the staff. I mean, it's all sorts of interesting things going on there. I don't know what their plan is at the moment,
their
but if
plan is to do more SpongeBob until they die.
yeah, and trying to, I guess, capitalize on nostalgia. Like I don't see how this really accomplishes that in any. Well, okay, I don't know how it accomplishes recreating the nostalgia in an effective way.
Plus, this nostalgia doesn't do anything to newer audiences at all. Like it
Yeah.
seems like Adventure Time has appeal to an older audience as well as a younger audience, but it still has a massive younger audience at the same time.
Yeah, like
That
it's the reason for its being is not to attract the older audience.
Sure. I mean, it has lots of smart shit in it, but that doesn't mean that it's completely aimed there. So I don't know what Nickelodeon is trying to accomplish by going explicitly for an audience that is probably in their mid to late 20s, like going into their 30s. I don't know what
Or
they're,
above, actually. I'd
yeah,
say people in their mid 30s remember a lot of these cartoons too, like
sure.
Rocko's Modern Life and all that stuff. It's just I think a lot of them have either have moved on by now, and also like if you're gonna try to do that, just bring the shows back in some form. Like, hey, put them online for streaming or something. Do what The Simpsons did, or with that FXX, that when they did the whole Simpsons, every single episode all in a row.
Which was an interesting idea.
It was and I thought it was a really effective promotional tool. Like, hey, you guys have like that Nicktoons network as well. So you have like Nickelodeon and then Nicktoons as well. Why not just like say, hey, we're gonna run these marathons of these older '90s shows and do it that way? Like rather than trying to either remake something that is not remakeable, or at least will only end in tears and everybody involved, or whatever the fuck this crossover movie is.
Right.
So I don't know. I am also just not a fan of the whole nostalgia thing in general. I find it a kind of it's unhealthy on some level, and it's often kind of like a very misguided kind of
Right.
thing to try to bring that stuff back, and it's also not understanding why that nostalgia is as powerful as it is.
Yeah, I think the best way to approach nostalgia is less to make works that feel like they're trying to capitalize on nostalgia or try to, recreate something that is nostalgia, but maybe invoke elements that are inherently nostalgic, like things that remind you of past things or are like themselves inspired by
Yeah,
previous works. Uh,
stylistic things.
sure, things that make you think of that sort of type of work, rather than just necessarily trying to recycle the same sort of thing over and over and over again. An example of this, for example, to use it randomly, is that moving into a territory that I know quite a lot, anime. With a lot of the stuff with anime, there's always a lot of stuff of like older super robot shows. They often make remakes. They're just constantly recycling the same plot over and over again. And some of these remakes try to do like, oh, we took this old show but made it grimdark, and it's like that's kind of lame. I'd much prefer if you guys did something new, but was like inspired or took
An
in like some of the
homage or
elements,
something. Yeah.
yeah, or was somehow took something in the kind of the general style and the kind of approach and all of these older works and use that as a basis to do something unique off of it or something that invokes the past without literally trying to retread every specific idea to try to say like, oh, we check marked all the boxes here. This is nostalgia, right? You're feeling nostalgic about this. Give us money.
The closest I've seen to actually accomplishing that, and right now, is the series that's currently running, Ushio and Tora. It's animated by Mappa, and that one I really like because it feels retro, but not in an annoying way, or not in a way that feels bad. But it's still done with modern techniques, so it's kind of this nice way to bridge the gap. I thought also that the remake of Parasite as an anime that they did was a really good way of translating the past that still kept some of the retroism in it, but not making it feel too disconnected.
Sure. I mean, anime is typically it's very bad at this. I mean, animation in general tends to not be very good at this because they tend to, I mean, typically they don't actually aim very heavily on the nostalgia element, just because even if they're invoking a past thing, it tends to be just more as like window dressing more than anything. Like if they're making a new like Mickey cartoon, as they have, they're not very much relying typically on the past in terms of anything they actually derive from.
Well, at least not for like entirely the gags or the content
Sure.
of it. I mean, the idea is that Mickey
I
does
mean, it's
have
handled
a
well. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying like it
yeah.
tends like nostalgia is a weird thing to try to remakes are one thing. Well, I kind of lost my train of thought here. It's just like like doing like pure remakes tends to be a more like, okay, we're taking this basic concept and we're kind of riffing off of it. It tends to be a little bit more unique. But doing like a pure like nostalgia thing like this seems almost like something we don't actually see very much in animation, because most people realize that would probably suck.
Well, here's the
Other
thing,
than
and
Nick, apparently Nick thinks that's a great idea.
it kind of reminds me. I don't know if you read this article about that couple that is like, we like to live back in Victorian times, and that makes us,
Oh
understand
god,
it
that
better than
fucking
these
article.
historians. And here's the thing: is the reason that is faulty is that they're taking these objects and removing them from the past and trying to use them within the context of modern life.
Yeah,
Meaning they're back then in the Victorian time, there was no such contrast. They weren't doing it as a reaction to, cell phones and shit. Like that just was that it was just the way things were. I mean, you also had the society and politics and all that other stuff around it that kind of
right.
that goes. So the thing with the same thing with nostalgia is that it's not just the show itself, it's having been the age you were when you were watching it. It was the environment in which you were in when you were watching it. All that context is what really adds to that nostalgic feeling. It's
Right.
not just the movie itself, it's not just the TV series itself, etc. It's a lot more, and you can't recreate that purely. It's
And,
always going to be within the context of something else. And that's why, again, like all these attempts to, it's like, oh, we'll bring this thing back, oh, nostalgia. It's like, you can't. You physically can't do it. You can't psychologically erase someone's like 20 years of life and society and all that other understanding of the world and recreate that. It just doesn't work.
but you can make that type of work. You can make works that are somehow inspired by the works of the
Yes.
times, or like the aesthetic, or
Yeah, yeah.
even the sense
But
of humor. And you can make things that kind of invoke and make people capitalize on people's fondness for that style of work without
yes.
having to literally go like, hey, it's Doug. We paid Disney to use Doug again because they didn't give a shit anymore. We got Doug back. He's here in our Avengers team up, I guess.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's what I mean
Fuck.
is well, again, I think the people chasing the nostalgia to remake it are not understanding that a lot of what the appeal was is something well outside of the show.
Right. And also these IPs, to be honest, they're not very long lasting IPs. They kind of suck. Like some of these works were good in the past, but no, I'm not like, man, I really need to see New Angry Beavers. That sounds like that'll be perfect. Because how could that be wrong? It's like, no, like, who
They
fucking
were a product of
cares?
their time.
Yes, exactly.
Like the
Like it
humor
was,
sensibilities, the sense of timing, I mean, the tastes change.
sure. And I'm sure there are people who are like, oh shit, New Angry Beavers. I love Angry Beavers. I want more Angry
But
Beavers.
they would be in such a minority at that point.
I know. It's a small audience, and also that audience is dumb. Like, if you are out there and that's you, feel bad. I'm
Well,
sorry.
it's kind of like for me, it's also like the thing was good as it was. I don't need the remade version or a rebooted version. It's like when I heard the news about Fooly Cooley possibly getting rebooted by
Uh,
Production IG. It's like, well, I like Production IG's work, but I'm like, Fooly Cooley was like as fine as it was. Like, what else are you gonna do with it that it wasn't already? It's not
right.
like this thing was disappeared like 40 years in the past, and you have to rescan everything to make sure it actually like it isn't like degraded. Like it's fine. It exists. You could watch it. It's there.
Yeah, and plus, any sort of resurrected sequel tends to be just very typically very, very bad. Like,
Yeah.
especially if it's not the original creators involved, it tends to be shrill, is the term I'd use. Obviously, with these cartoons, they're not
Empty.
super.
A husk.
Yeah, for a lot of these cartoons, obviously they're not very narrative driven, but Fooly Cooley was actually fairly narrative driven, so it's kind of like, why would you like Even if you come up with like a thing you want to do after this fact, it's like, what's the point? Uh, One of my favorite anime of all time is Eureka 7. Great anime. Writing was done by Dai Saito or Sato, who is a fantastic writer. He did a lot of the writing for Cowboy Bebop, for example. Uh, they did a sequel to that eventually called Eureka 7 AO. Uh, None of the writing staff was brought back. It is trash. It is like trash to an offensive degree, and it doesn't actually make any sense as a story wise as a sequel. It is. It's nice that it's like that because it makes it very easy just to pretend it's not real because it makes no fucking sense.
I love it when they do that. They really considered the audience in mind.
Sure,
Oh yeah, no,
it's
what
like
we're going to make is garbage, so we need to make sure there's some plausible deniability, just to
yeah,
to
just
give
so
them
people
that
can
distance.
rationalize and ignore it. Yeah, it's like thanks for that, I guess. Good work. But at the same time, it's kind of like sure, I liked Eureka 7. Maybe I could theoretically like that, but it's like anytime I hear that they're making a sequel or like a remake of these sort of things, my reaction is never, oh yeah, that'll be great. It's more like, oh god, they're gonna somehow make this shit because history shows us again and again that that's what they do.
You can't capture lightning in a bottle, but that doesn't stop everybody from running out in the middle of rainstorms trying.
Yep.
All right, so I think that's it for news, at least on my end.
Yep. I don't got anything else.
All right, so let's get started on the Triplets of Belleville, or also known as Les Triplets de Belleville, or for some reason the UK title was Belleville Rendezvous.
Which I believe
I thought
is
was a
the name
better
of the. I think Belleville Rendezvous was the name of the show that the Triplets of Belleville were actually inside of the Triplets of Belleville.
It's also the name of the song,
Oh,
the
is it?
main song.
Okay.
And also, oddly, I think that also makes a bit more sense in terms of what the title means, like, a reunion at Belleville.
Sure.
So it was made. Here's the thing, I was surprised about this. I kept on thinking this movie was more recent, but this was actually originally aired, at least in France, in 2003.
Yeah.
I keep on thinking about when I was in college when I was watching this. I was like, no, wait, it actually is a lot older than I remember. So it was made by Sylvain Chomet. A bit of background on him: he is a guy that did a couple films, The Old Lady and the Pigeons, which is a great little short. You can definitely look that up. He also did The Illusionist. He might be more well known recently for doing that Simpsons opening where it's a bunch of French stereotypes. That was beautifully animated, and probably one of the better Simpsons openings in a long time. And he is also known as a cartoonist of some renown in France as well. So he wasn't just an animator and a director. I think he has also branched out into doing some live action film, but not to as much acclaim and skill as his animation work. So the film itself was nominated for Best Animated Feature that year, being, I think, one of the first PG-13 animated films to be nominated, but it had lost that year to Pixar's Finding Nemo. Um, the music was also well, at least the Best Original Song, Belleville Rendezvous, was also nominated for Best Original Song that year by Benoit Charret, and it unfortunately had also lost, and I think it lost to what was it? One of the Lord of the Rings movies.
Right.
So the film was an interesting production because it was handled between like 4 different countries all at once. So you had like an office in France, you had one in Canada in Montreal, you had one in the UK, and then you also had one in Belgium. So that was a very interesting production process, especially way back in 2003, considering like, server speeds and internet stuff. I mean, all the telecommunications to be able to do that kind of production.
Right.
It's telecommunication in terms of like producing animation now is really easy, but like that's relatively recent that you've been able to do that really effectively.
I mean, there was broadband back then.
True, but I mean across like all the different countries and the amount of data you'd have to do and just the time zones and calling in and out.
Fair.
It's got to be pretty much it must have been very difficult. Um, so I'm not sure how I wanted to kind of like tackle this one because it does have a plot, but it's kind of
It's very loose and like
it's very
basically
loose and
the
there's
first
almost
third
no
of the
dialogue.
film doesn't actually have all that much happen plot wise. It's more setting up a
Development.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's character development, but it's also it's very ponderous for what it is as well, and it's a lot more setting up a feel, an atmosphere than anything.
Yeah. Well, and what would you kind of call that atmosphere? Because like, here's the thing with this film, and I'm not sure if this is a criticism or something that is just endemic to just the worldview of the film. I don't want to call it joyless, but the characters never really reach emotional highs, and even the warmest feelings expressed by the main character are really understated. I mean, like the happiest moments they ever get are contentment, and even the reunion, near the end of the film is not that. You don't have that welling up of emotion of the reuniting.
Feels very European.
It does.
Which I don't mean as an insult. I'm just saying,
Oh
like,
no, I mean,
it
but
feels like
again,
that style of animation and that sort of. I don't know if it feels a little reductionist to imply that, like, oh, like, European animation tends to be
or
of a type.
filmmaking, it's
But I mean, it does feel like a very much a French style film because there are a lot of films that have this sort of level of like sort of emotions and this kind of like subdued emotional state to it. Yeah, I don't
it's
know how to.
sentiment. It's like sentimentality, but like a colder version of it.
I don't think it's
Like,
cold. Like it's warm. It's just like it's not. It's never hot.
well, that's what I mean. So it's tepid, but again, it's not a bad thing either.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's. I mean, it has. It's hard. I mean, it's a really it's
I
a
mean, it
difficult. It's
doesn't have a
difficult
lot
to.
of really high emotional periods. Even during like I'm gonna jump really far ahead and pointlessly here. So, like
That's
the
fine.
action sequence at the end was the utterly felt like the most pointless thing in the world, and
Oh,
it felt
the slow speed chase.
like that is a funny concept, but it didn't actually end up being that funny to me.
There
I
was a
mean,
couple in there that were good.
there was a couple in there, but it was felt a little overlong and like kind of rote. Like oh, we have to have one here to make this feel like we're accomplishing something with the action sequence or for there to be a denouement. But
I think that does carry. I think that criticism is both valid, but it also carries over to a bit of the other film as well. I mean,
sure,
the pacing at
absolutely,
times is can feel somewhat labored.
sure,
I mean, not as labored as let's say a John Kay type of thing, where
right,
it's like painful, but it does screw up the pacing, and there's also a lot of it uses repetition, and sometimes that can be really good as like a leitmotif and things like that, but sometimes it feels like, do you get it yet? Do you get it yet? No, okay, I'll have to do this again until you get it. Like that's sometimes it feels a little bit like that.
sure. And there's a lot of stuff that feels like it's in there for very peculiar reasons. Like I don't actually see how it either serves the work or serves comedically or like what it actually is accomplishing. Like a random example though they use as a visual thing is that the dog keeps on imagining itself like dreaming of being on the trains that it keeps barking at and then seeing people barking at it, and they revisit this like several times as like a visual thing, and I don't quite know why unless they're trying to do it as a interesting transition, which
Or
sure the first
it
time
could be like a
maybe.
thematic thing, but it doesn't.
There's
The
no
theme
message to it though as
there's
far as
well,
I'm
there's no
aware.
theme expressing like it could be like, oh, his dreams are supposed to kind of be a summary of the feeling of what's going on at that moment, but it
No,
doesn't. Like
it's just like
that's what
it's
I
a
thought it was
visual.
trying to be. It did it, but it wasn't even being that. So I got very confused.
It feels more like they had like a visual like that'd be an interesting visual. Let's do that. And it's like okay, sure. And then it's kind of like it's like to what end? I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I think there's the other thing too is a lot of this was also it felt a little bit like there was some tech demo going on in here, and
Sure.
the same thing happened in The Illusionist where there was this weird city turnaround shot that was put in just to show off that they could make this this city in recreatable in CG but look 2D, and then do this weird camera spin around that did nothing,
Yo.
and that's the same thing that's happened to him before. But speaking about the visuals, so this one's interesting. So, like, you can feel the traditional style pretty heavily, particularly when you examine the line quality. It kind of has a somewhat similar effect to. There was an era of Disney where instead of doing the inking, they did the kind of photocopying effect. So they literally took the drawings and photocopied them, or at least the cleanup of them, and just used that directly onto the cells. So you had a lot of the scratchiness and a little bit of the dirt on there. You would see that in I think in the Robin Hood movie, that was in that era. But in this case, because I think they did it digitally as opposed to the older photocopying system, the lines are a bit softer and kind of a bit cleaner in comparison. And the contrast in the lines is a bit lighter than the other Disney ones. So like the lines aren't always pure black. You get a little bit of that kind of pencil gradation in there, so that catches the color of the characters within the line sometimes. So I kind of liked that. It felt softer even if you had some harsher lines. And then the other part is that this is, of course, a movie from the early 2000s, and that period of time, I think, particularly in animation, was a really awkward period for compositing things digitally, and also how to best effectively integrate CG and 2D effects. I mean, to this movie's credit, there are some times when the CG was not all that noticeable, but then other times it was really not quite at the level in terms of like texture and movement to match the style of the world itself. And
Vehicles in particular very much
vehicles in
stood
particular,
out.
a few of the bikers, but impressively, there were some of the bikers that I thought were hand done that turned out to be CG.
How did you
And
feel about the waves during
the
the?
waves didn't work for me.
Yeah, it did not
Yeah,
work for me at all.
but again, that's that case where I think they just hadn't gotten, this again is early 2000s. I mean, look at a lot of even the CG back then. We go, that's terrible, but at the
Yeah.
time that was. But again, there were some cases where I was watching one of the making of things, and I was like, oh crap, I thought that was a hand drawn part. Like they had done enough of the a special rendering technique that had hit it well enough, or they did it in short enough that you don't really catch that CG look. So like there's a part even where the main character biking when he's training on the side of the up that hill in the rain. I didn't realize that that wasn't CG animated at first. But then when I'm at the bike race and you see the it's like the other bikers, for example, along with the vehicles, some of them are very clearly CG.
Right.
So some of them work better than others. And I think in that case, the dreams that the dog has might have been a way of showing off that demo because it was entirely a CG thing with just him being 2D. So there were cases where it worked and it didn't, and I think some of it was a bit of a tech demo.
Yeah. I mean the basic animation when they actually did a lot of the I think it looks really good. Like I think
Oh
it's a
yeah,
it's a very nice looking film, and I think that's one of the greatest assets is that it's a very nice film to look at in terms of things like that.
and it has
It's
a
got that
unique
going for it.
style.
Sure, it's got
It
a
it
very European
it's
style.
very it's that very French style of
Hmm.
caricature, and I really appreciate that you don't have a lot of the characters that almost none of the characters look the same. You have um, there's no standard beauty type of thing where like all the characters have to be derived off of this doll face. You just
Sure.
do like here's the basic doll face, and it's like okay, we'll just change a little bit of features, and that's your new character.
Yeah,
And then we need
the
another
current
character as
Disney style
another.
that is.
Yeah,
We
well,
don't
it's
read.
not just Japanese style, but I'd say also even the current Disney style in
Yeah,
some cases has that problem of like everyone has to have a certain base level of attractiveness, and we do a slight variation off of it.
sure.
This movie is not concerned with that at
No.
all, and almost takes delight in just ravaging the human form
It
in
almost seems a
creative
little
ways.
mean, like
It
it
is
almost a
mean.
little
Oh, it is.
misanthropic to some degree.
Oh,
Like
it is
everybody is
mean.
hideous, like awfully hideous. Like
The
every
the
single individual is like kind of like humans are fucking gross looking. Fuck them. Like the literal only examples are the triplets during the intros thing.
But even then, that's a caricature parody of that 1920s
Yes,
style of. I thought that was really cool. That was really well done.
that was cool, but I was a little put off by the
Oh,
racial stuff
yes,
there.
there
It's
is.
like oh.
But you know what? Oddly, I thought that was a sadly accurate representation of the vaudeville racism of back
Sure,
then
but
too.
I don't.
Sadly, I mean,
It felt weird, like that
you weren't
entire
sure.
visual,
You weren't
and then the
quite
visual
sure.
gag of like the men turning into apes to steal the bananas off her skirt. It's like kind of like,
Oh, it was creepy.
why
But
is this
again,
here? I was kind of like, this is how you're starting your film off, like,
see, I couldn't tell if was that supposed to be in the world that they live in, that's what that world looked like back then, or was it one of those cartoons that you would have seen from Warner Brothers a long time ago, like when they would do like, oh, here's all the celebrities of the time, and they're all in this club, and they'll do like episodes like that. I was wondering because they had a whole bunch of these other performers in there that had such highly specific faces in comparison to the drawing style that they were kind of parodying, that it felt like maybe this was supposed to be one of those cartoons that they're watching that's a parody of the famous people of that era.
I mean, there was a musical interlude in the middle and it got interrupted due to things happening in it, which tended to me imply that it was supposed to be a live show. But then the grandmother was calling it a movie, so I don't know.
Yeah, so like that's the part that's confusing, and I think that's where the racism aspect became a bit more confusing, because if this is supposed to be kind of like a parody or satire of of that type of era, then you can kind of understand having that in there as like, no, this is the kind of shit that people used to do, and this is a
What
part
what would
of
be
it.
the point of doing
Or,
that though? Like, I
well,
don't know
well,
what the
that's what I
message
mean
is
is
trying to
if
give.
you're only if you're doing it as a satire or parody, just to, as a representative, just like I'm not going to ignore that this happened. But again, because this movie doesn't make that point, and it's really unclear what it's trying to do with that, it becomes uncomfortable because you're not seeing it as commentary even.
I mean, I didn't even see like what point it even served, even like from a comedic standpoint. It didn't
Oh
seem
no, it
quite.
didn't. I
I
mean,
mean, it felt that's honestly it felt like they were going for like a gag there with like, oh, the guys turning into monkeys because they were sure horny. It's kind of like what like that. There was that
yeah,
gag kind of
again,
threw me off, and also like the weird one of the gags. I'm just gonna call attention to one visual gag that I'd never really quite got. Like, so the entire film is set in France ostensibly, right?
well, no, not always, because
No, but there's
remember,
French flags even when they go to the stand-in for like New York City, Belleville. Like
well,
there's
because
French
it
flags
also
everywhere.
well, it's the French Wine Center.
It's the French Wine Center, but
And
then
they
there's the
apparently,
Statue of
well, Liberty,
Liberty
who's
there.
fat with a burger and an ice cream
Yeah,
cone.
and then they have the thing of like them looking at the photos of like the mechanic, and he went to Holly Food, and he's there with the hamburger, and it's kind of like I mean, sure, I don't
That's
have an issue.
America,
I don't have an issue if that's
according
like
to
if they're
France.
going for regional gags, but it just feels like it's so disconnected from the other gags, like the setting, because it feels like they're going from this like all world French type of thing, like a world of France, because that's kind of the style that they're going for, and like the fact that they go even to this America standing and it's still France. So I didn't really quite get what the point of was of like, like, oh, this entire thing is very French. This is the French wine center, but we literally cannot resist, doing a slight there. Like, I don't care if they actually make a slight on America for like types of stuff, because who cares? It
Yeah,
just feels like I don't
and
get.
hey, they're kind of accurate.
Sure, I just don't get what they're actually accomplishing for the film. Like, it doesn't feel like it actually serves the film. It
No, I mean the whole
feels.
thing could have just taken place in like, oh, they live in a rural area, and then the rest of this takes place in like downtown Paris or something.
Yeah, or
Like
you can
they
do
could have done
it
that,
at
and
the
you wouldn't have lost
Belleville,
anything.
stand-in, but I don't get what the point of having it like, or even doing like a New York, France thing. I just don't get what those particular visual gags like the whole racism thing at the beginning. Like, there's a bunch of gags in here that I don't quite get how it actually serves the film, either from a comedic standpoint, because they didn't seem all that funny given the amount of
Yeah,
time that they spend on it, or from a narrative or even like kind of feeling standpoint, because they feel like they actually do a disservice to the kind of like the feel of it.
they distract, or
Sure,
to me, I view that as kind of like that comedy writing problem where they say like sometimes you have to kill your babies, and that
absolutely.
who whenever they were storyboarding this or writing it, they go like, oh, I really like this gag, I really like this gag. It's like, yeah, but John, it doesn't fit into the film. Well, fuck you, I'm putting it in anyway.
It
And
definitely
when you
feels like that
cram it in
100%.
there, and it's like, oh, they needed an editor, I think, in some cases. And
Sure.
honestly, it's hard to place like where the best gags were. I think for me, one of the best ones is the fishing for frogs part, where it's using an old German style hand grenade into the water.
I think all my favorite bits were all the stuff in the mafia, like sort of ring with the actual bike
Oh
race.
yes,
Like all the stuff involving that particular scene with all the gang members, because the gang members' visual style is perfect.
I
Like
love
all of them
that
being the tiny little, like all the mob leaders being
with
the
the
tiny little
berets
guys
and
with the same little thing, and all the goons being the big ass dudes that like linked up and they all move as
but
like a
I,
single
I
unit.
liked though how if you looked at them, so each gang pair, like the bruiser kind of pairs, they both looked like each other, but they all had variations depending on who they were guarding.
Sure.
So like that was kind of a cute little thing
Yep.
where like, okay, these ones have like the sunglasses but with like a different type of mustache, or these ones like they did, but they were still similar to each other, and then with the little guy sandwiched between them.
Sure.
And that does remind me. My favorite is the it's another hand grenade one where it's spinning around, and then you see the dog chasing its tail, and we don't see it explode, but we see it when it does explode, the dog stops turning around, and then you just see this rain of those little berets.
Yep. That's a good
Nice.
that's a good visual gag.
That was a
And
nice one.
I also liked all the stuff with the score keeper in there. His
Oh,
fucking
that,
cross eyes and all he kept on jerking about
I found it was funny, but in an interestingly disturbing way.
absolutely. And
Like
it worked
the
really effectively
grotesquerie
for what
of
they were
this is,
doing.
I think, is when it does. Honestly, I think Sylvain Chomet might do better if he does something that is, again, much more grotesque and macabre. I
Yeah.
think his style and oddly, I think some of his better jokes have this kind of darker edge underneath it.
He feels to me like a lot like he just needs an editor. Like the first
Yeah,
third of the film felt
or at least a
like
focus. I think he
sure.
needs focus.
Sure, like I get the point of the first third of the film where we have all these sort of build up of like, oh, here's the relationship between, Sousa
Souza and Champion.
champion. And they spend a lot of time in there, but it feels like it's too long. Like I don't actually see like what the point of it actually spending all this time showing on here's how Sousa is helping to, deal with champions training. We're going to show this very slowly. And then we're going to, okay, here's the race. Yes, things are going to happen. Okay, things are going to move slow again. And then things actually start happening in terms of a plot at that point, and it feels very inexplicable almost. Like, oh, wait, there's a plot? Like, oh, things are moving at a completely different pace now. And then it slows down again. But then it just speeds up again when they have things that they want to actually do for the narrative. But then it slows down when they want to do establishing stuff. But the pace just feels really uneven. And the
Yeah.
amount of time that they spend on certain elements feels peculiar given the narrative that they're actually trying to show here. I mean, if they even particularly care about the narrative, I don't actually necessarily get an impression that the narrative is something that they're particularly feel is important for this
Well,
film.
there's very little narrative to begin with. I mean, the entire
Sure.
movie itself again feels like a showcase. It's a showcase of animation, it's a showcase of character design. It's a showcase, I think, of gags and maybe observations and things like that. I mean, it and the plot is just what they hang all those on. It and because they don't really have enough plot or character stuff going on, they end up going like, "Oh, we need to stretch this out." And it just doesn't work in that regard. I mean,
Yeah.
again, like there's aspects of this I really like, but I do like having rewatched it. I go, okay, now I remember why it didn't win that year. It just doesn't have that. It doesn't have the focus to give you that emotional resonance at all. So again, like when she does rescue him, you don't really feel all that much
And
because yes, while they did, they spent the one third time period of establishing the relationship, it because it is so the emotions are so subdued, you can't tell like if that reunion really means anything.
right. And especially because Champion doesn't actually ever really seem to react to much of anything of like what's going on. Like he
Yeah,
actually
he just looks at the world through really depressing dead eyes. Even like the happiest you see him is when he first gets the tricycle and goes around circles. That's it. The
Yep.
rest of the entire rest of the movie, he is a depressed like turtle of a
Yep.
person. He
like
is a turtle.
I mean the amusing thing is that when they end up drugging them to kind of get them into doing this racket, there's not actually much of a difference in him between being drugged and not drugged.
Yeah, like I don't. Well, again, like, wouldn't the threat of violence be enough? Like, do they really have to have them with like the damn wine thing? Was it a
It's a
wine
funny visual
joke?
gag, okay.
I guess.
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's not great, but like, I mean, they're trying to just kind of give a thing like the whole. It's so they can do the visual screen thing of them moving in front of the race. It's like, oh, they're being tricked. Like that's what they're going for with there. Like I think that's fine because it's the
It's
whole
fine, but
escape
again,
sequence is
well,
built
and I
off
guess
of
it's
that.
to fit in with the whole idea of like the reason that this mafia is powerful is the wine. It's it's the French wine center that they're in. That's
Sure.
the big building they're in.
I mean, sure, but I mean, it's more the sense of like you never really get a feeling of champion on anything other than being depressed and lonely, and then they actually end the film with like actually like oh, okay, after all this sort of stuff, like okay, he finally responds to his grandmother who is now dead after seeing the film of the story, but he's alone himself. Like it's like kind of like this. Oh, life sucks for these people,
Well,
huh?
like, yeah, I didn't understand.
It feels like kind of like I'm trying to take away like so like what, like
What was
trying to
the point it
project
was
from where
trying
the
to make?
yeah, we're trying to project where the story ends to this little epilogue thing. Like what the course of things are, you don't really get a good feeling of it. Like, okay, so he went home and then he stayed there for 50-ish years and then nothing happened. Like, you don't really get a feel of like, oh, it was all worth it. By saving her grandson, she helped him get a life, the type of things. Like, it's kind of like,
Well,
no,
and
not
that's
really.
exactly the problem. Is okay. So in normal stories, something has to change.
Mhm.
What's the change?
You don't get like, nothing had. There's no arc
Yeah,
to
that's
any
what I
of the
mean. And again,
characters.
like for a story to have, again, it's basic story structure is you have like something that it's the rising action, the apex, and the return. But with the hero's journey, something has to either for good or bad, you know, depending on the type of point you want to make. There has to be a change in status quo.
I'm
This one base literally just does not. Maybe the idea of having the train on the circular thing of the bowl is to and the cyclical everything else going on is supposed to represent that like nothing changes, life is pointless. Like, is that the theme of this thing?
I mean, the thing I get more like the only real arc is that like at the beginning of the movie they open up with the grandmother asking him if the film's over and the kid doesn't respond, and now he's basically reflecting on his life and saying like, oh, the film's over, grandmother. It's like, oh, he responded. Is that the arc he's admitting after like 70 years that he has great affection for his grandmother? Like, oh, but you're not actually really attaching much emotional weight to this. Like, it's a
Well, and like
change, but I don't know
during
what
the
it actually
chase scene,
means.
there's no reaction between her and him.
No.
Like, let's say if they had a moment,
Yep.
like he's like sober and he has to keep going, and so she pushes him to be able to keep going. So something individually between the two is has a hand in how they succeed in escaping. That would make some kind of reason for it.
Yeah,
Like
you
him
don't really get a
acknowledging her or her helping him, but it doesn't.
you don't get a feel for anybody's
He's a
emotions.
non-character.
Yeah, like nobody has any real emotional moments. Period. The closest you really get, funny enough, is the waiter apologizing to the mob boss for the dog.
Well,
That is the
there's a couple small, but again they're really subdued ones. So you have like the sense of obligation that Sousa has to the triplets, so she keeps on trying to do the chores in the house.
sure,
I mean, that's a a complex and subtle emotion, but it's, I mean, again, all the emotion, there are emotions that exist, like the idea of her wanting to connect to her grandson and trying to come up with new
sure, yeah,
ways, and his I think depression at, I guess, what is implied about his parents' death, and but they're so small and so subdued, and it doesn't really add up enough. Like, I'm not asking for weepy sentimentality, but I need a change in the way the characters behave or the way they view the world, or I need it to kind of build up and kind of burst, or at least reach some kind of apex, in terms of the emotions of the characters at some point. But it
right.
never really does.
But Champion also ending up like entirely alone at the end also seems like a very dour note to end on when so much of the film really is kind of focused on these sort of reactions, like these emotional connections. Like the entire reason why he's depressed early on is his parents are dead, and his grandmother's trying to make him happy and sort of stuff, and she's supporting him wholeheartedly. And then we go from that, and then the other big, thing we have with relationship is the relationship between the triplets, which I don't think we ever really called attention to, is that there's like actually like five spoken lines in the entire film, which is super neat.
Yeah, no, I
Like
thought
that's super
that's what's
cool.
really cool. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, but like you have like this implied sort of connection between the triplets, which is great. It's like, oh, they didn't succeed, but they're living their life pretty happily. It's not exactly a rich life, but they're getting along and they're together at the very least of something. But then we end this film like with him just all alone, which is surrounded by photos of like his dead everyone, and like it's
is
kind of
dead everyone.
like he doesn't even have the dog. Like the
The
dog is
dog's
dead and stuff, and
obviously dead.
it's like he's just so like it's kind of like, oh, he's just watching TV alone. Wow, fuck,
Yeah.
guys,
And
that's
he
a
and at that
poor way
age
to
he
end
still he
this.
doesn't respond to a wife or a husband or anything. He's responding to his long dead grandmother.
Yeah, I mean, even like it's like
Like, that's who he's talking to. Me
sure,
implying that he literally had, between that period, no one else in his life other than her.
Yeah, it's like it's just kind of like, oh, grandmother died. Like you don't have no. There's not even like trophies to imply that he accomplished anything with the biking. There's one little bike figure in there, but it looks like a little statue rather than like an actual like trophy or anything to say like, oh, his obsession with biking eventually went there. He got there. He followed his passion. You don't get an impression
Nope.
of that he ever went there. It's just kind of just like, oh, they had like a emotional like a mirroring to the beginning is what they were going for there, which is interesting in a sense, but it feels emotionally dead.
It's kind of like it's Bergman-esque, like Ingmar Bergman, but Ingmar Bergman has more emotionality. So it has the darker themes of it, but he just in this movie it doesn't reach the highs necessary to make that work.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much this is the fact that Chomet wrote this himself. Like maybe he isn't a particularly great writer,
Yeah,
possibly.
I'm getting the feeling that I think he is best as a designer. I think he's best as an animator. I mean, and sometimes he does some really good gags, occasionally, but it it's hard. He's kind of like a mixed bag. Like
I mean, the
he,
scenes felt well directed for what they were.
yeah,
Like he's certainly a good director, but I don't the script. No, oh,
yeah, that might not be what his strength is, or in terms of story. I think really
sure,
what it is, it's a story problem. I mean,
yep,
you could kind of forgive some of the gags not working and things like that if you were still engaged in the emotionality of it, what's going on. You know, like the character motivation and how they feel at a given time and how that changes. Like you could kind of go like, yeah, the gags don't work, but I'm interested in what's going on a character level.
right.
This one, it feels like, well, how are they just going to solve the next problem? And that's where it seems more interested in. So like I think the infiltration of the gang area is pretty funny. You know, there's the way the triplets live, like the small little things about how that works is kind
Mhm.
of funny and really great little observations there. You know, those end up being actually the most charming and not funny in a laugh out loud sense, but funny and like, like that's kind of interesting. You know, like
Right.
the internal laughing or like that's a neat observation. Like I think in the chase scene, the only part that really got me laughing is because the design of the cars is really long and kind of back heavy. So when it goes up this hill, the front slightly, starts turning up and it turns over, but then it turns over again and then again and again, but in this very staccato way.
Mhm.
So each time it lands on one side, it's a really heavy slam, and then it goes again, and then just speeds up to ridiculousness. Like that ended up working, and that's an entirely visual gag. But then so many of the other ones around just don't work at all.
I like the visual gag of the guy getting shot.
Oh, with the which one is it? The creepy bet taker.
Yeah, I like the guy with like, well, yeah, the bet taker, but also I liked the every time you saw that particular bike rider, he had like the super sharp teeth, and was just like breathing really heavily.
Oh yeah,
And
well
so
the two
even
of the
when
two.
he's getting executed, his reaction is entirely the same. He's like in a constant state of horror at all times and exhaustion. And then he gets
Yeah.
shot, and it's just like the way that scene is paced is really interesting and well done. And I thought it wasn't like laugh out loud funny, but I was
No,
like,
it's
wow, this is amusing.
it's actually quite disturbing,
Yeah, sure.
really.
I mean, it's
But it's
disturbing, but it's also
disturbing
very
in such a
cartoonish way.
fascinating way. Yeah.
Yep.
So like
Very few of the gags really
no, a
hit.
lot of
I'm
them
trying to
don't
think
at
of
all.
ones that felt like the
I like the
Sousa.
Boy Scout trying to constantly get her across the street.
That was good.
That
I
was a
like.
cute. The when she's renting the pedalo
Mhm.
to, it's like, here's she takes her Frank out and he's like, 20 minutes. She's like, yeah, of course.
Yeah, I like
You
that.
just like that was a good one. And then actually, if you watch past the credits, it goes back to him on the beach in the dark, just waiting for his pedalo to come back
After it being apparently like years when they did like
or
those.
something. Yeah, like
The
it's
season
he's
transition was kind of odd because it doesn't like I think they're
it's
trying
not
to show
necessary.
time, but it feels like the actual time movement doesn't actually seem to make very much sense given the narrative.
No, not at all.
I mean, one of the visual gags, like I liked her with her constantly blowing the whistle, eventually transition into her blowing the whistle at the guy driving the
Oh
ambulance
yes,
when he's
that the
trying
way
to
of
fix
going
the
like, "Hey,"
wheel.
that was a good one. That's a good character thing for her.
Yep.
Her persistence being a character trait, and then expressing that in the form of a gag against another character. I
Right.
thought that was a really effective, so it's a great little character-based gag.
Yep, that was good. Though immediately after, the whole stuff with them using the dog as a tire did not feel like an appropriate gag given the style of humor of the work. Like the work felt a little more grounded than that at most times.
Yeah.
And then that was in there. I was kind of just like,
I liked the kind of dark gag of what's her name? It's the one with the accordion, and they don't show it, but they show the cart that she was on stuck under a bridge, and they're trying to rescue her from under this like stone bridge.
mm,
I thought that was kind of an interesting dark gag. um, yeah, it's kind of hard. I mean, it's hard to explain. Oh, the slowdown of the train as the dog's barking at it. So you see it from the inside of the train car.
mhm.
That was kind of funny.
Yep.
I thought the dog's behavior in the daily life sections was actually really well observed.
It was, though it was a little drawn out, like
Oh,
a
it
lot of
was
the stuff
drawn
with
out.
daily life
It's
stuff.
just, but it was like, no, yeah, I could see a dog behaving that way. Like that was actually well done in that regard. But again,
Right.
like yes, it was like, can we get started, please? It's this is taking a long time.
A lot of that stuff did feel like you were saying that it feels like a kind of more a demonstration than anything.
Yeah.
Like a kind of like here's what we can do. Look how well we can animate this dog in this sequence. It's like kind of like it's just like you don't feel like you're really accomplishing much by doing this though. But they went ahead and did it multiple times. Like that repetibility or this repetition feels like it could be making a message or kind of causing a feeling, but it kind of just more felt like okay,
Well,
go on,
it needed to
let's
be
have
what's
some
called
stuff.
it needed to be a leitmotif,
Yep.
like something that just appears throughout, as kind of like a theme, but it just, you know,
But he preferred to be a theme and has to have like some sort of like to me like a narrative
well,
connection
yes,
in
that's what I
terms,
mean.
or yeah, it has to be
It would
like
have
oh
to be that to
the
have a
the
port.
they actually one thing like that with like them showing the modernization of time, like the train stuff, like in the building being pushed, like they could have gone and like taken this film in an entirely different way to make a commentary on the modernization and like how things never change, or like oh like what if like the bike stuff was like completely different, like oh like him doing things the hard old fashioned way and maybe like modernized like biking type stuff, like someone doing the high tech biking way of learning in lab, like a completely different narrative or something. But some of the actual elements in terms of the design would make more sense, like kind of like the
But see, then
trains
it
as a
wouldn't
rep.
be the Triplets of Belleville. And again, here's the other thing. So it's called the Triplets of Belleville, but is they they're really kind of just like they're kind of there.
Yeah, they
I mean, they're fun. I like them, but what purpose do they really? They don't serve thematic purpose,
sure
really. What's going on here? And they're really only there to kind of give her
a team.
assistance, yeah,
Yep.
to carry out her own ingenuity. Because again, like most of this film is about her ingenuity and coming up with these things, but then like they're really mostly just a tool for her in the end.
Right.
And they don't again like their connection to her is not that it's like yeah they kind of like her, but that's about it. Like you don't again there's not enough emotional connection between the characters or why they're there.
I mean, if they took the triplets in the sense of them being like outdated actors and again like use it somehow to
Ran with it,
address
yeah.
modernity, modernization, but they don't. They don't really go. They never go anywhere in that direction, even though it feels like all the elements are set up to go there. They aren't
Yeah,
used to that end or really any end, as far as I could tell.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if
it
there's like a
just
cultural barrier here that I'm missing. That there maybe like I kept thinking, but like I kept when watching this, like I'm like thinking, like, is there something I'm missing here from my personal perspective that I'm not getting?
no,
Like,
I feel like I mean I've watched a good amount of films from all around the world, and again, like yes, you'll sometimes see that certain European style films will have a bit more slower pacing, but it's not like this in this regard. Or
right?
I've seen ones that use repetition, but they have a reason for it, whereas this one it doesn't feel like it has that reason. So I really don't know what else to say about it at this point. I think
Yeah,
we've
we didn't
covered
really go into the narrative or anything, but
but
it's
that's
not really much to. I mean, we could talk about individual like plot beats, but they don't really matter all that much.
no. Again, I think the conclusion we've come to this is that it was it's more visually focused
Yeah,
than anything else, and it's a great film to watch for that aspect because like the way the backgrounds are drawn, the character designs, the way they move, the acting, all that is really well done. I think it's really impressive.
It's also really
I
short.
It's yeah, and luckily the film is short enough to you know
Yeah,
to not
we're
wear out
we're
its welcome
going there just
entirely.
for animations feels reasonable. Like it doesn't
Yeah,
feel like if this film was like 30 minutes longer than what it is, I
or
would
10 minutes longer,
yeah, I
too
would
much.
feel really kind of annoyed at that point, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. So I would recommend this film. I think just for visual analysis and kind of appreciating a style that we really don't see in animation that much. Um, I I think if you are a fan of caricature, um, a little bit of misanthropy, I think in terms of visual style and savage character designs against other human beings. I
Right.
think that's what makes it kind of interesting. You could also look at his other works as well for that, but I think this was kind of his big seminal work. Um, I'd say check it out, but understand that it kind of has these problems and maybe almost by design, just because that's not what their interest was. Not to say that you can forgive that, but it's understandable.
Yeah, I think this is recommendable as animation, but not necessarily as a film.
That's a good way of putting it.
Like it's
Yeah.
a great feat of animation of work, particularly for the time and of a style. Just as a cinematic work, it does. Would not recommend this if this was live action or was less animated.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. So, anyway, let's move on to what we will be covering next week and the week after. So, we are going to be covering a Zorak selection, Aim for the Top! Exclamation mark, Gunbuster.
Yep.
And then after that, we are going to be covering The Amazing World of Gumball. So, I'm excited about that too.
Yeah, with Gumball, we will not be going over a specific episode selection. I think the intention is just kind of talk
Just,
about it
yeah,
in broad strokes. And if you're planning on joining us, just see if you can catch some random episodes. We're going to be talking about just kind of a in broad strokes of what it does, and not necessarily of any particular
yes,
singular thing. So I'm sure we'll be using examples here and there.
yes. So, just, browse. I mean, you could see tons of it. I mean, it's on Cartoon Network all the time. So,
Right.
there you go. You can always reach us at addpodcast@gmail.com. You can reach me on Twitter at rymagnuson.
I'm at SA Zorak.
So, do you got any projects to plug?
Oh, not at the moment. Other than I would just say, check out the YouTube channel that I'm using. Zorak Goes On. We've been placing these very podcasts on YouTube. In fact, you might be listening to this on YouTube right now. You can see comments people have been leaving if you are curious, and also
I
participate in the
also,
discussion.
when I give him the audio, I mix it in higher quality for the YouTube one.
Yep.
So, you can hear our beautiful voices in 320 kilobytes.
You can also see all the people getting really pissed that we didn't like Ruby.
Oh,
Which is an interesting perspective that when we were putting these on YouTube, I actually came to you and said, like, I'm not surprised that this is. I would not be surprised if there was a counter reaction, and it kind of played out to some degree, and that's understandable given the differing audiences out there. We never
yeah.
said it was a work without an audience. We just said the audience wasn't us.
Good qualitative judgment there. All right. So, we will see you next time.